I am a doctor. For 12 years I have practiced the language of certainty while living inside doubt. I have learned to press my thumb against a wrist and speak like a verdict: strong, weak, thready, gone. I have learned to put a door between myself and the sound of families breaking. I have learned to wash my hands until the skin forgets that blood is warm. This is the secret I swore I would never tell. It begins on a rain-polished Tuesday when the city's lights looked clean enough to forgive anything. The was the usual theater. Metal carts rattling like cheap applause, monitors stuttering in green, the coffee burning a hole through the night. We were short 2 nurses and 1 resident who called in sick with a text that looked like a ransom note. I had been on since noon. The world smelled like saline and tired. His name was Daniel Harris. 46. He came alone at 10:20 p.m. Hand pressed to his chest the way people do when they are trying to hold their life inside with sheer will. He joked to triage about the vending machine stealing his quarters. People joke when they are afraid, it gives the fear a costume. He was pale in that fluorescent way hospital light imposes on everyone, but his eyes were the kind that still argue with fate. I noticed that. I noticed strange things. Scuffed shoe leather, a frayed watch strap, a man's hands that look like they know wrenches, not pens. I took him because I was next and because I needed something ordinary to stand on. Chest pain, the chart said. Onset 1 hour ago. Nitrates could calm a storm like his. Aspirin could sharpen the odds in our favor. Oxygen if his SATs dipped. Labs to tell us whether his heart had started to write its goodbye. Routine. Protocol is the church we pray in when our faith is thin. At 10:37 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from the private wing. Our carpeted conscience. The place where money is a kind of anesthesia. VIP arrival at 2300. Cardio consult required. Prepare suite. The words came dressed, polite, inevitable. In medical school they tell you about triage. In hospitals they teach you choreography. Everyone knows which doors open inward and which only open when a certain keycard meets a certain lock. I told myself I could split in 2. Leave Daniel stable and dart upstairs long enough to soothe a man who owned his calendar more than his heart. Samira, our charge nurse, watched me write orders. She is one of those impossible people who still believes there is a clean way to do a dirty job. He's not right, she said, thumb tapping a nervous rhythm on the rail. I can feel it. Nurses say this and I listen. But that night I listened like a man listening through a wall. EKG, serial troponins, nitro drip at 5, I said. Morphine if pain spikes and pressure tolerates. I wrote it neat so the paper would trust me even if I didn't. Daniel exhaled and tried another joke, something about how he'd planned to watch a game and suddenly he was the ball. I smiled because that is part of the ritual too. The VIP arrived on schedule. The elevator that serves the private wing runs quieter than the others. Like money found a way to lubricate gravity. A man stepped out whose cufflinks cost more than a month of rent on the street Daniel lived on. He was concerned, but the kind of concern that expects to win. Beside him, a personal assistant balanced a tablet and a smile. Behind them, a wife tracked everything the way a hawk tracks movement in tall grass. I did what the badge requires. HX, PX, Labs. Reassurance in a voice calibrated to glide. I told myself I was protecting the hospital's lifeline. I told myself I was protecting the jobs of people who keep this place standing. I told myself a lot of noble things that were mostly scaffolding around a simpler truth. I did not want to make enemies that owned the building I work in. At 11:13 p.m., The overhead paged me back to Bay 3. Daniel. The hallway felt longer than before. Samira's eyes met mine at the curtain and I understood the look before she spoke. Pain 9 of 10. BP's slipping. He's going gray. She said it like a fact, not an accusation, and that was worse. I checked the orders, the EKG, the drip. I told her, increase to 7, and she repeated it back because repetition saves lives. My hands moved like they always do, competent, quick, pretending not to shake. I adjusted the pump, taped the line, and told Daniel we were right there with him. He nodded, and I hated how faith looks on a person who hasn't earned it. Samira brushed the pump with her knuckles, a habit, a safeguard, and stopped. Doctor, she said, voice tightening. 70. A decimal point is smaller than a confession and heavier than a body. The room shrank to the size of that single digit. For a heartbeat, his, mine, I'm not sure, everything waited. Then his pressure dropped like an elevator with a cut cable. His skin turned the color that makes new nurses step into the hall and cry where patients can't see. I slammed the stop. The pump beeped its sterile disapproval. Oxygen. Fluids. He gasped like air had rusted. We called for more hands. We called for the crash cart to stand by because you always invite disaster early if you're polite. We reversed what could be reversed and watched what couldn't. I kept saying his name. Sometimes saying a name is the only handle you can find on a person who is slipping. There is a sound rooms make when everyone inside knows something is failing. It is not the flat line. That comes later, honest as a cliff. It is the humming dread between beeps, the way people talk around the words they fear. We got him back to a rhythm, ugly but alive. We moved him toward ICU, because when the ground under you tilts, you climb toward machines that know how to lie convincingly. In the elevator, Samira asked, what happened? Her eyes were not a trial yet, they were a prayer. Complication, I said. The ugliest patch we have. I felt the word rot as I used it. ICU took him in like a long, slow breath. They settled him under a window where night pretends to be gentle. The attending scanned his numbers and asked questions I answered fluently. We stabilize, we confer, we keep moving so guilt can't find us. It always does. I went back upstairs to the private wing because there is always another patient, another demand, another moment you could choose differently and don't. The VIP's labs were clean enough to frame and hang. I told him he would stay overnight. He thanked me with a handshake that said he did not thank people often. His assistant slipped a card onto my clipboard. A name, a number, a favor owed. I slid it into my pocket and told myself I'd throw it away later. At 1:04 a.m., Daniel's arrhythmia returned like a debt collector. ICU was already at war when I arrived. We shocked him. The line snapped from chaos to order and back again. On the third jolt, the monitor painted something we could pretend to trust. We held it together with drugs and pressure and will. I found the phone a few minutes later. I read the chart. Emergency contact. Lily Harris, daughter. The address was 2 bus lines and a tired walk from the hospital. I dialed and counted rings like a coward counts reasons. Hello? A voice said. Young, frayed, trying to be brave. This is Dr. Ward at St. Clement's, I said. Your father was admitted with chest pain. He's in intensive care. We're working closely with him. Language polished smooth from overuse. Is he okay? She asked. I told the truth and lied at the same time. We're doing everything we can. She arrived 22 minutes later in a hoodie that still remembered a dryer's warmth. She looked at him through the glass and the glass reflected back a girl made smaller by fluorescent light. He hates hospitals, she whispered. People always tell you something you can't use. They need to anchor their story to the person who is becoming a body. What happened? She asked. I gave her the clean version. Unstable angina, escalating care, close monitoring. I did not say the word that could dissolve the floor under both of us. Error. She cried quietly, the sound of someone who has learned early that loud grief embarrasses the world. We lost him at 3:27 a.m. We tried not to. We called for help that arrived as procedures and drugs and electricity. Sometimes you fight because that is how you keep your own shape. Sometimes you stop because fighting becomes cruelty. I said the time. The nurse reached forward and pressed the monitor button with more tenderness than I had given him all night. In the family room with the soft chairs and the hard reality, I told Lily. There is no good way to pour a sentence like that into a human being. She swallowed, nodded, folded, unfolded her hands, nodded again, as if she could position the moment somewhere less lethal by agreeing with it. He was supposed to retire next month, she said. He promised he'd drive with me to the coast. Promises are the most fragile bones we break. I stayed. I handed her a tissue that would do nothing meaningful. I rehearsed telling her the truth. That her father's death had a decimal point, that her grief had an author with my name. I rehearsed the consequences, my career, my license, the hospital's careful legalese cracking like ice. I told myself that confession would not resurrect a man. I told myself that silence was kindness. That was the night I learned silence can be cowardice dressed as mercy. The paperwork called it complications of acute coronary syndrome. A sentence that fits in a box on a form and not in a life. I wrote my note. Nitro titrated per protocol. Hemodynamic instability. Escalated to ICU. Words at their worst. Tidy, bloodless, true enough to pass. Samira watched me sign. She didn't say anything then. Later, she would. Later, she would stand in the doorway of the medroom and ask me if we were the kind of people who hide from the mirror. But in that moment, she just tapped her badge against the counter twice. The way she does before she starts another shift inside a shift. Morning bled in. The VIP left with instructions and gratitude and a promise to donate something with his name on it. The assistant pressed the card back into my palm like communion. I put it in my coat again because apparently I collect guilt in rectangular shapes. I tried to sleep and failed. The flatline traveled home with me and lay down in the other half of my bed. When I finally did sleep, I dreamed of numbers sliding sideways, of pumps blooming digits, of a girl in a gray hoodie turning a watch over in her fingers as if time were an object you could put back together. A week later she returned. Lily. She asked for me at the desk, and the clerk's face did that thing faces do when sorrow walks in with a destination. She had his watch in her palm, the leather cracked, the crystal fogged near the edge. I want to thank you for trying, she said. People pad the distance to the word dead with softer phrases so they can cross it without falling. I nodded like a penitent who has no prayer left. He always said doctors carry too much, she added. I hope you put it down sometimes. I didn't know how to tell her that I had put it down and then picked up something heavier and smaller and sharper. I didn't know how to tell her that sometimes the burden is the only proof we were ever worthy to carry anything at all. That night I opened his chart again, as if the record could teach me a different past. The medication log blinked at me, indifferent. The spike was there. A brief, brutal surge, corrected within a minute. A minute is forever when a heart is deciding, and nothing when a life is leaving. I hovered over the amend note button. I could write it in. I could leave a trail that led to me. The risk team would call. The meetings would happen in rooms where carpet muffles dissent. I would be asked to explain how 7 became 70. I would say I was tired, pressured, human. They would say the hospital cannot afford human right now. I closed the chart. Cowardice is a choice you make in small increments until it becomes your posture. The plaque in my office reads Excellence in Patient Care. It hangs crooked because I never found the right anchor and because the wall does not deserve straight lines from me anymore. Sometimes I imagine Lily walking in, taking it down, handing it to me like a receipt. In medical school we learn the stages of grief and imagine they're for families. Years later you realize they're also for us. Denial. It was a complication. Anger. At systems, at money, at gravity. Bargaining. If I work harder I will balance the ledger. Depression. The hour between night and morning when your chest feels like a room with no furniture. Acceptance. A word I do not trust. I returned to the ICU window the next evening, stood where the glass holds the ghosts of yesterday. Beds breathed. Machines hummed lullabies for people who could not sleep. I watched the nurses move with that quiet competence that makes you think of ballet and battlefield. I pressed my palm to the glass as if I could lay a hand on everyone inside and promise better. A hospital is a city built on the edge of endings. We put up signs, set rules, perform rituals, draw blood, draw lines. We stand between bodies and the dark and pretend the gown is armor. We win, often. We lose, consistently. We learn to carry the losses like stones inside our pockets so our hands have something to do besides shake. I tell you this because secrets rot. They sour the air in your chest. They turn you into the kind of doctor who says, complication, and sleeps anyway. I have started to forget certain things. Where I left my keys, whether I locked the door, the names of classmates I once loved like family. But I do not forget the decimal point. I do not forget the sound the pump made when Samira said, 70. I do not forget the way Lily held that watch like she could rewind it if she found the right angle. This is the beginning. The night I crossed a line small enough to miss and wide enough to separate me from who I was before. There are other lines, other nights, other names. There is a meeting with administration whose minutes read like fiction. There is a conversation with Samira that does not go the way I hoped. There is a letter I wrote and never sent. There is a mirror I avoid in the physician's lounge because it keeps telling the truth. I am a doctor. I have saved lives. I have killed with a mistake. I am asking you to stand in the doorway with me while I tell the rest, not because it will make me clean, but because confession is the only antiseptic I have left. They say a mistake becomes lighter when you share it. That's a lie. A secret carried alone is a stone in the pocket. Spoken aloud, it turns into an anchor tied around your throat. After Daniel died, I went back to work. The world did not stop. No one came into the to congratulate me on admitting guilt. No jury appeared in the lounge. The machine still beeped, the patient still bled, the night still demanded its tax. But the air felt different, thicker, as if every corridor remembered what I had done. Samira remembered most of all. She did not confront me immediately. She worked her shift with the quiet precision that nurses cultivate, moving from patient to patient like a soldier clearing houses. But I felt her eyes on me, not always accusing, sometimes simply asking, "Are you going to tell the truth?" I didn't. Instead, I attended meetings. The morning after, risk management called a case review. It was routine. The hospital protects itself the way skin scabs over a wound. Automatically, without asking permission. The committee sat in a half circle. Administrators in crisp suits, a lawyer whose glasses looked heavy enough to break his nose, the chief medical officer with a face that practiced neutrality like yoga. I presented the facts: chest pain, elevated risk, unstable progression, escalation to ICU, eventual arrest. They nodded in rhythm, jotting down words like protocol, timely, complication. The lawyer asked, "Any deviation from standard dosage or titration?" My tongue was a traitor that day. It shaped the word, no, without hesitation, smooth as silk. My pulse throbbed so loud in my ears I half expected the lawyer to hear it and record tachycardia in his notes. Samira sat at the edge of the room, invited because she was charge nurse. She did not speak. She did not correct me. Her silence was not protection, it was a mirror. Afterwards, in the corridor, she caught me. "You lied," she said. I could have defended myself. I could have insisted that it was an accident, that I corrected it, that no confession would bring him back. Instead, I whispered, "I know." Her eyes softened for a second, then hardened again. "Don't expect me to carry it for you." That night, I found the assistant's card again in my pocket. I thought of throwing it away. Instead, I dialed the number. Her name was Claire. She answered with the poise of someone accustomed to power leaning on her shoulders. "Dr. Ward," she said, voice like polished glass. "Mr. Atwood appreciates your care." Atwood, the VIP, had recovered well, enough to walk out with the arrogance of immortality. Claire's tone suggested that gratitude was currency, and I had just been paid. "We're always available," she continued. "If you ever need support." Support. A word wide enough to hide 1,000 sins. I hung up. My fingers shook. I told myself I had only called to hear the voice of temptation and then walk away. But that night, when the chief medical officer summoned me for a quiet word, Claire's name surfaced in his sentences like oil in water. "You handled a delicate balance last night," he said. "I've had calls from upstairs. They're pleased." "Pleased?" I asked, incredulous. "You prioritized," he replied. "That's what leadership looks like." He leaned closer. "These decisions are never clean, Ward. We keep the lights on with donors. Without them, no ventilators, no ICU beds, no jobs. Remember that." So my failure was reframed as loyalty. A man was dead, but the hospital was satisfied. It is a terrible thing when institutions baptize your sins and call them virtues. Weeks passed. On the surface, I was the same doctor, diagnosing, prescribing, cutting, suturing. But inside, I was decaying. Every patient's wrist I touched carried Daniel's pulse. Every daughter's eyes became lilies. And then came the second line I crossed. A pharmaceutical representative arrived, sleek and smiling, bearing samples in shiny cases. "Dr. Ward, I've heard about your work in cardiology. We're running a trial, funding available, honorariums generous." I should have said no. Instead, I nodded. Money had begun to whisper louder since I realized morality was deaf. The trial drug was supposed to improve recovery after heart attacks. Early studies were inconclusive, but the company spun data into gold leaf. I agreed to enroll patients, knowing some would be exposed to risks we did not fully understand. The first patient in the trial was a man not much older than Daniel had been. His insurance barely covered basics. He jumped at the chance of cutting-edge treatment because it sounded like a lottery ticket. I gave him the pill, and he smiled at me with gratitude that burned. 3 days later, he coded. The report called it multi-organ failure. The rep called it an unfortunate outlier. I called it murder with paperwork. But I kept going. Each step deeper made it harder to turn back. Each signature tied me tighter to the system I had once thought I could heal. Samira confronted me again after the second death. You knew the risks, she said, eyes blazing. We're advancing medicine, I countered weakly. You're advancing your career. Her words cut sharper than scalpels. How many more, Ward? How many more patients before you admit you're not saving anyone, you're protecting yourself? I had no answer. That night I sat in my office staring at the crooked plaque, Excellence in Patient Care. The irony tasted like blood in my mouth. I thought of Daniel, of Lily, of the man in the trial. The ghosts were piling up. And still, I wrote another order for another patient to join the study. Guilt is a poor teacher. It keeps you after class but never improves your grades. I kept working. The trial crept forward, swallowing charts and signatures. Patients nodded at words like innovative and protective, and I let those words stand between us like a shield I could hide behind. Administration loved the numbers. The rep, Evan, started showing up with coffee and the kind of compliments that smell like commission. You're a leader, he told me. Leaders, he implied, don't flinch. Samira watched me not flinch. Her third confrontation didn't happen in a hallway or a medroom. She waited until dawn when the ER's frenzy had boiled down to a thin simmer. She stood in my doorway with a folded piece of paper pinched between two fingers. I filed this, she said. It was an incident report, clinical, cool, disgustingly polite. Medication mistitration. Immediate correction. Subsequent hemodynamic collapse. She did not accuse, she recorded. The form did what truth often fails to do. It avoided adjectives. You could have talked to me, I said, though she had. Twice. I did, she replied. This is me talking to the people who sign our checks. You'll blow up my career. She took a breath tired enough to belong to a much older person. No, Michael. You did that. I'm trying to stop the debris from hitting someone else. It is easier to hate an enemy than to face a friend. I didn't hate her. I hated the way her eyes didn't look away. Risk called again, faster this time, sharper. The meeting room had the same carpet, the same heavy glasses, the same choreographed neutrality. But the script had changed. They had Samira's report and the pump log open on a screen. The spike pulsed on the graph like a heartbeat that had learned how to confess. The lawyer led. Dr. Ward, can you explain the variance? My mouth opened and closed like a fish that had finally noticed water. It was corrected within a minute. After it reached 70. Yes. Silence. The kind that makes furniture sound accusatory. The chief medical officer put his elbows on the table. A gesture I had always found fatherly until it wasn't. Why didn't you include this in your initial note? Because I am a coward. Because I thought the hospital would bless my omission. Because I was upstairs selling our integrity to a donor with warm sheets. I missed it, I said instead. Half true, which is to say, still a lie. The lawyer blinked slowly. We will need an amended note. And we will need to determine whether notification to the family is indicated. The word notification dragged a chain behind it. If we tell her, she'll sue, the CMO said, not bothering to perfume it. If we don't, Samira said from the back, we will deserve it. I felt the whole room tilt. The lawyer's eyes slid toward her with the smooth contempt of empire. Ms. Rahimi, your input is noted. They asked me to step out while they deliberated. Claire was waiting in the corridor as if she had been invited by the building itself. Not the ICU assistant Claire, but Atwood's Claire, the assistant who wore power like a scarf. Rough morning? She asked, voice soft enough to cut. Mr. Atwood has been apprised of unfortunate chatter. I stared. How would he? Donors hear things before the walls do. She glanced at the conference door. This is a good hospital, Dr. Ward. It deserves good narratives. A card slid into my palm as if she were a magician and my hand the hat. Call me if the narrative needs alignment. She walked away on quiet shoes. I stood looking at the card. Somewhere inside that room a vote was happening about whether I was a man who had made a mistake or a liability that needed to be managed. They called me back. The verdict had the cheerful cadence of administrative mercy. We'll classify as near miss with adverse outcome, the lawyer said, footnoting tragedy. Dr. Ward will amend the note. We will add targeted education regarding infusion protocols. We will not notify next of kin at this time. The last sentence landed like a gavel. Samira stared at me. It wasn't anger now. It was something worse. I had seen that look on families who realize the code team is working for the chart, not the person. After the meeting, a colleague found me, Voss, an attending whose teeth were straight and whose envy had always been slightly crooked. Tough day, he said, napkin clean sympathy in his tone. Administration can be unforgiving. They were forgiving, I said, and heard the disgust in my voice. Ah, he tilted his head. Then perhaps they remembered your contributions upstairs. A pause. You know I've been vying for the research directorship you were tapped for. Funny thing about positions balanced on goodwill. He smiled a small, private smile. They can tip. That a threat? A forecast. He left before I could decide who I hated more, him for saying it, or myself for making it true. I walked to my office and finally did it. I took Claire's card to the trash. Then I missed. My hand shook and the card slid onto the floor and stayed there, face up, like a dare. I bent to pick it up and my pager screamed. Code blue, OR2. The world shrank back to the only thing it understands, urgency. The patient on the table was Maria Delgado, 58, emergency laparotomy for a perforated ulcer that refused to play fair. Anesthesia was fighting pressure that wouldn't stay upright. The surgeon swore softly in Spanish and prayer. I scrubbed, gloved, stepped in as the attending stepped out to breathe. We do this. Take each other's burdens for 2 minutes at a time. We stabilized. We lost. We stabilized again. Breaths became currency. I gave what I had. She came back to us, fragile as the squeak of a newborn's first attempt. We finished. We dressed the wound like an apology. That would have been the end of it. Just another night where death knocked and we double-locked the door. But when I was washing my hands, the surgeon looked at me over the foam. Heard about your review, he said. They're not going to hang you. They'll hang someone, I muttered. Maybe they'll build a bigger hook. He dried his hands. Be careful with Voss. He wants your job and he doesn't mind messy kitchens. Noted. And the trial? He added, almost casually. The rep's been very generous with the department. Generous, I echoed. Money is an echo chamber, it teaches you your lines. He left. I stared at my hands under the water. They looked clean. They were not. The trial accelerated. Evan brought numbers that sang and spreadsheets that danced. The CMO started including me on emails filled with words like prestige and publication. The hospital newsletter photographed me at a podium with a quote about innovation with compassion. The plaque on my wall hung as crooked as ever, but it had company now. Certificates, a framed letter of appreciation from a foundation whose logo looked suspiciously like Atwood's cufflinks. The body count also grew. Slowly, quietly, in ways that could be argued away with comorbidities and baseline risk and statistical noise. But noise, if you listen long enough, organizes itself into a song. Samira brought me a stack of charts. Look, she said. Patterns. I scanned. Early trial enrollees, older, uninsured, eager. Adverse events noted with lawyerly caution. A cluster that didn't want to remain random. Bring it to risk, I said. I did. She held up a second stack. Emails, replies, calendar invites to meetings that would never occur. They're busy. They always are, I said, hating the weary in my voice. Then help me, she said. We can pull the plug. On a trial with 7 zeros behind it? On a donor who shakes the building to see what falls out. They will bury us. Maybe, she said, maybe they'll have to dig. I looked at her. I saw the line she wouldn't cross and the one I already had. Give me 48 hours, I said. I'll take it to the CMO. She nodded. 48. After that, I go outside. Outside? Regulators. Press. Whoever still believes in walls. Walls. I thought of Claire's card winking at me from my desk drawer, of Voss measuring my shadow, of Evan walking the halls like a man who had rented the air. 48 hours. I had less grace than that. That evening, Claire texted me. I had never given her my number. The message was short. Dinner? Atwood would like to discuss your leadership. I should have said no. I went. The restaurant was the kind of place that thinks lighting is a moral stance. Atwood sat in a red leather booth, his smile already at the table like a place setting. Claire hovered, elegant as a threat. To the future, Atwood said, lifting a glass. To clear protocols, I said, because pettiness was the only weapon I could still afford. He laughed. You're blunt. Good. We need blunt people. People who understand that hospitals are ships and ships require captains, not committees. I heard about the tempest in risk. I respect your restraint. Restraint? You didn't feed the wolves, he said. You didn't throw yourself to the spectacle of ordinary outrage. Ordinary outrage. As if decency were a hobby for people with small goals. He leaned in. The trial is important. The hospital's reputation is important. And men like you, he gestured with his glass, ice whispering, are important. Promotions are coming. Influence is available. The only question is whether you're willing to carry it. He could have said bribe. He said carry. Claire slid a folder across the table. Inside, a draft press release naming me Associate Director of Clinical Innovation. A 7% raise. A speaking slot at a conference where men like me say things into microphones and call it meaning. I need to take something back to my team, Atwood said, as if we were negotiating the price of wheat. Reassurance. That you are steadfast. What does steadfast look like? I asked. Keep the trial steady. Keep risk calm. Keep your nurse quiet. The last sentence was the only honest one. I closed the folder. If I breathed wrong, the paper would cut me. I need time, I said. Of course, he said, and his smile was clean as a guillotine. I didn't sleep. I wrote a letter to Lily instead. Dear Lily, you don't know me beyond a room where I broke your life open. I have to tell you something that will not fix anything. Your father's death was not only the fault of his heart. It was also the fault of my hands. I set a pump wrong. I corrected it quickly and too late. I didn't tell you because I feared the wreckage that would follow. I am telling you now because the wreckage is already inside me, and you deserve the truth that was owed on the night I took it from you. I didn't print it. I didn't send it. I saved it to a folder named Letters I Will Regret. I watched the cursor blink like a pulse that had forgotten pride. At 4 a.m., my email pinged. Subject. Meeting. Enrollment milestone celebration. Evan had scheduled a party in the conference room, cupcakes lined like a firing squad. I closed the laptop and went to the hospital because some punishments require fluorescent light. Samira was waiting on the unit when I arrived, her 48 hours spent and counted. "Well?" she asked. "They won't stop," I said. "Not for us. Not yet. Then I go," she said. "Outside." "Samira, don't," she said. "You had your chance to be the kind of man I believed you were." She turned. Voss was there, leaning on the counter like a man on a fence. "Big day," he said brightly. "Cupcakes at 10. I hear your speech will be inspirational." "Get out of my way," Samira snapped. He raised his hands. "I'm just here for the science." His eyes slid to me. "And the vacancies." She walked past him. He leaned closer to me and lowered his voice. "Word is she's going to blow the whistle. Word is Risk will ask who's bitter and who's brave. Word is the CMO prefers doctors who keep their nurses collegial." "You're enjoying this." "I'm studying it," he said. "If the director's chair gets lonely, you know where to find me." He left a smell like aftershave and smoke. By noon, the celebration was in full falseness. Balloons. A banner that read "Innovation saves lives" as if fonts could grant absolution. Evan clapped me on the shoulder. The CMO gave a speech about teamwork. The rep from the foundation took photos where we leaned in and pretended we were building something clean. Samira didn't show. Later I learned she was at a diner 3 blocks away, sliding a file folder across a Formica table to a reporter whose notebook bled ink like open veins. 2 days after the cupcakes, the story broke, small, local, but sharp. Questions surround hospital's heart drug trial. It named no one. It named everyone. It mentioned patterns. It mentioned oversight. It mentioned families who felt unheard. The hospital responded with language that had been rehearsed in every institution since institutions learned to hire lawyers. Risk called an emergency huddle. The CMO's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. The lawyer's voice was ironed flat. "There will be interviews. There will be narratives. We must be aligned." "Aligned with what?" I asked, thinking of Claire's folder. "With the facts as we choose to present them." Samira spoke to the press, Voss announced helpfully. "She's emotional. It's understandable. She's ethical," I said before I could pull the word back. The CMO turned to me. "Ethics is a table with many seats, Dr. Ward. Pick one and stay in it." The interviews were performance art. I told the camera about safety, about compassion, about the hospital's commitment to both. The camera believed me because it is paid to. Families watched from living rooms that knew grief, and some of them believed me because they wanted to. Others didn't. They wrote emails that landed in my inbox like stones. I read each one and replied to none. That night, my office door was ajar when I returned from the unit. A figure sat in my chair, comfortable as a stain. "Claire, you should lock," she said. "I thought we were done." "We are never done," she said. "The story is moving without you." Samira went to the press, I said. "You'll try to crush her." "We will protect the institution," she said, as if those phrases were synonyms. "That includes you, if you wanted to." "I don't," I said, and surprised myself with the truth. She tilted her head. "There are other ways to protect. For example," she slid a flash drive across my desk. "Security footage. ICU med station. It shows Ms. Rahimi adjusting a pump the night of Mr. Harris' death." My body went cold with a precision medicine can only envy. She corrected my error. "The footage does not include context," Claire said. "It includes fingers. If this goes to court, fingers become narrative. You're blackmailing me with the hands that tried to save him." "I am showing you how the game is played," she said calmly. The hospital cannot afford a martyr. You cannot afford a crusade. I stared at the drive. It glittered like a small, stupid sword. What do you want? I asked. Sign the alignment statement. Deny knowledge of systemic issues with the trial. Support a temporary pause for optics. Publicly thank risk for swift action. Privately assure the CMO you are steadfast. And if Ms. Rahimi continues her campaign, remind her, gently, that stories have angles. I thought of Samira's face when she handed me the incident report. I thought of Daniel's watch strap cracking in Lily's hand. I thought of Voss measuring my fall. Get out, I said. Think, she replied, and stood. At the door she paused. Men like you do not get to be clean. You get to choose which stain shows. When she left, I closed the door and locked it. I sat with the drive on the desk between my hands. I had never been closer to redemption and never felt it further away. I opened my laptop and wrote another letter to Lily. I told her everything this time. The decimals, the donors, the trial, the cupcakes. I wrote until the dawn chewed the edges of the window and the city woke believing in breakfast. I saved it to the same folder and renamed the folder Confessions. Cowardice with a stronger spine. I walked to Samira's station. She looked up, eyes ringed with the kind of tired that swims. They'll come for me, she said. No preamble. HR, risk, maybe bored. They already have ammunition, I said, and told her about the drive. She laughed once. It was not a happy sound. Of course. That's how they do it. Take the hand that saved a life and make it guilty of touching. I can take the hit, I said. I can say it all. You should have, she said softly. You still can. The intercom cracked the air. Rapid response, Ward C. We both turned. Patients do not schedule their crises around our crises. Go, she said. Be a doctor. I ran. The corridor stretched. A man at the end of it was forgetting how to breathe. I put my hands where they are supposed to go and did what they are supposed to do. He lived. It felt like stealing from a future I hadn't earned. When I returned, my office smelled like a storm. The door stood open again. The drive was gone. On my chair sat Voss, spinning slowly, smiling like a man who had learned a new trick. He held up the drive, twirling it between his fingers. You dropped something? I reached. He closed his fist. Tisk. Possession is 9/10, Michael. Give it back. In exchange for? He set the drive on his tongue as if tasting it. Endorse my candidacy for research director. Publicly. Today. You're blackmailing me with someone else's blackmail. Efficiency, he said. We are, after all, a modern institution. I stepped closer. There's a patient on Ward C who is alive because I didn't humor a snake. Don't be the reason I forget that. He weighed my anger like a merchant weighs grain. Your anger is worth less than my ambition. I thought of how this ends. With me in hearings. With Samira on the curb. With Atwood in a different restaurant. With Lily reading about me in a paper that cannot print regret. I opened my mouth to say no. The overhead crackled again, louder, nearer, more violent. Code black, security incident, main lobby. We both looked toward the door. Footsteps. Shouts. A crash like glass remembering it is sand. Stay here, Voss said, pocketing the drive. I'll keep your secrets safe. He left, and took the only proof of the wrong story with him. I walked toward the lobby, pulled by the noise. The automatic doors were held open by a jam of bodies, security, a man in a denim jacket screaming about kill trials and blood money, a reporter with a camera shoved like a weapon between shoulders. Someone had leaked more than papers. Someone had brought outside inside. Samira stood to the side, not hiding. Her face was a decision, not a plea. Our eyes met across the static. The man in denim saw our badges and roared, How many? Spit flew, a dot on my cheek that felt like a baptism in gasoline. Security moved in. Bodies tangled. The reporter's camera blinked red, recording or warning, I couldn't tell. And in that crescendo, the hospital's power flickered. Just a stutter, the lights dimmed, the monitors hiccuped, the computers forgot themselves for a heartbeat. In that brief dark, time slowed enough to offer me a choice. Do I keep building the story that keeps me? Or do I tear it, and see what bleeds? I reached into my pocket and felt the dent of Claire's card, the absence where the drive had been, the weight of letters never sent. I closed my hand around nothing and realized it was still a fist. Hospitals are built to withstand storms, but not the kind that start in the lobby with cameras rolling and reporters asking questions you can't answer without burning your own name. The code black was contained within an hour. Security dragged the man in denim away, still shouting about drugged experiments and paid deaths. The reporter was escorted out, her footage confiscated under the claim of privacy violations. But the image had already burned into every pair of eyes present. A doctor standing silent while accusations flew. My face, blank, became part of the story whether I spoke or not. Afterward, the CMO convened a private huddle. The room smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times. We will issue a statement, he said. Unfounded allegations. Rogue employee. Commitment to transparency. Samira sat stiff-backed, unflinching. Voss lounged like a cat, twirling the stolen flash drive between two fingers. Claire leaned against the wall as though she owned the plaster. We need unity, the CMO continued. The board expects alignment. Dr. Ward, you will address the staff tomorrow. Reassure them. Reinforce our integrity. I opened my mouth to protest. Claire cut in smoothly. He will. Her certainty made the rest of the table nod. That was the trick of power. Say a thing as if it were already true, and watch people reshape themselves around it. When the meeting broke, Samira pulled me aside. Don't do it, she whispered. If you stand up there and lie for them, you'll never come back. I already can't come back, I whispered back. You can, she said. Her eyes were hard but alive. Tell the truth. Take me down with you if you have to. But stop letting them write the story. Her voice lodged in me like a splinter. The next day, the staff assembled in the auditorium, nurses, residents, techs, janitors in scrubs still stained from work. Faces I knew, faces that trusted me, faces I had betrayed. Cameras blinked at the edges, internal comms recording every syllable. The CMO introduced me. Dr. Ward, a leader in our clinical innovation program, will say a few words. The podium was warm under my palms. I looked at Samira in the second row. She gave me nothing but stillness, a blank page daring me to write honestly for once. Voss smirked in the corner, drive heavy in his pocket. Claire stood near the back, her expression serene as if she already knew which path I would take. I spoke. I told them about protocols. About safety. About dedication. My voice was steady, my words polished. The auditorium listened politely. No one gasped, no one clapped, no one left. I told them what the hospital wanted. But at the end, my throat caught. I looked at Samira again. Her face broke me more than Daniel's flat line ever had. So I added a single, unscripted sentence. Sometimes, our greatest danger is not outside these walls, but in the compromises we allow inside them. A ripple moved through the room. Small, but real. Claire's jaw tightened. Voss stopped smirking. Samira's eyes softened for the first time in months. That night, my inbox flooded, half staff thanking me for honesty. Half administration furious about reckless phrasing. The board scheduled an emergency call. Voss cornered me in the lounge, hissed that I had signed my own obituary. "You think you're clean now?" he sneered. "You think they'll forgive you because you threw a poetic bone to the staff? No, they'll gut you. And when they do, I'll be standing where you fell. You'll be standing on bodies," I said. He leaned closer. "That's the only way anyone stands here." The board meeting was a firing squad disguised as a conference call. Questions came like bullets. Were you aware of deviations in trial safety? Did you suppress reports? What is your relationship with Ms. Rahimi? Claire sat off camera, but her presence filled the screen. Every answer I gave felt like borrowed air. By the end, they announced a temporary suspension pending review. My ID badge still opened doors, but I was already a ghost in the halls. Staff whispered. Some nodded respect. Others turned away. Samira found me in the stairwell. "You cracked it open," she said. "Not enough," I admitted. "Enough for light to get in," she said. "But light attracts shadows." 2 days later, the press escalated. A leaked memo surfaced, detailing trial deaths, underreported, tied directly to my signature. I knew instantly who had released it: Voss. He had the drive, the data, the motive. But he had cut my name deeper into the wound. Administration distanced itself. An individual acting outside guidelines. Risk sharpened its knives. Lawyers began drafting language that turned me from asset to liability. And in the middle of it, Lily returned. She stood in the lobby, holding her father's watch again. "Is it true?" she asked. Not angry, not weeping, just tired. I looked at the watch. The crack in the strap. The truth begging for air. My mouth opened. "Yes," I said. Her face did not crumble. It hardened, like stone taking shape. "Then you don't deserve the title you wear." She left. That night, I went back to my office. The crooked plaque stared at me. The folder on my laptop, Confessions, waited. I opened the letters. I read them all. Daniel, Lily, the trial, Samira, Atwood, Claire, Voss. Every word was an indictment. Every page a rope. And I realized Act 3 had already begun. Suspension is a polite word for exile. I walked the hospital halls like a man still allowed inside his old house, but no longer welcome at the table. Doors opened, but conversations closed. Nurses who had once trusted my orders now looked at me as though I carried contagion. Residents whispered, their voices stitched with both pity and relief. It wasn't them. Samira remained the only constant. She didn't absolve me, didn't curse me. She simply stood near enough that I couldn't convince myself I was utterly alone. "They'll choose a scapegoat," she told me. "You or me. Maybe both." I nodded. I already knew which way the wind was blowing. The board escalated the review. My trial enrollments were dissected like cadavers. Each adverse outcome stapled itself to my name. Risk framed them as avoidable. Lawyers sharpened their language. Negligence, misconduct, dereliction. Voss fanned the flames with selective leaks, documents, meeting minutes, charts with my signature circled in red. He didn't have to invent sins, he only had to curate them. One evening, after a day of interrogations that felt less like questions and more like rehearsals for judgment, I returned to my office and found a letter slid under the door. No envelope, no signature. It read, "They will not stop until you burn. If you want survival, give them her. The footage is enough. Trade her for yourself." The pronoun needed no explanation. Samira. I crumpled the paper, then smoothed it again, then crumpled it once more. My hands couldn't decide whether to kill or preserve it. That night, I met Samira in the cafeteria. Empty, save for a vending machine that hummed like an accomplice. They'll come for you harder now, I said. They already are, she replied. Her voice was flat, but her eyes held fire. HR asked if I'd ever had inappropriate closeness with you. The accusation crawled across my skin like insects. Jesus. They're trying to paint me as compromised. Emotional. Not objective. You're the only one who's been objective since the start. Then we have to decide, she said, leaning forward. Do we fight this inside the walls, or do we step outside and let it all burn? Her words lodged in my chest. I had been clinging to the hospital like a man clings to a sinking ship, still hoping to patch leaks with lies. But she was right. The hull was already shattered. If we go outside, I said, they'll destroy us. If we stay inside, she said, they already have. The decision was made for us 2 days later. The board meeting was supposed to be routine, review findings, outline next steps. But midway through, Voss presented the flash drive. He didn't hand it to the lawyers, he projected it on the wall. Grainy footage from the ICU med station. Samira's hand adjusting Daniel Harris' pump. No audio, no context. There, Voss said smoothly. The so-called whistleblower caught in her own negligence. Perhaps her campaign against the trial is a smokescreen. Gasps fluttered through the room. Eyes turned on Samira, sharp as scalpels. That's out of context, I said, standing before I realized it. She was correcting my error. The room shifted, confusion rippling like static. The lawyer's pen paused mid-note. Samira's head whipped toward me, shock and fury battling in her face. Explain, the CMO said. His voice was not neutral anymore, it was a blade. I opened my mouth. Years of denial, half-truths, omissions, all waiting to clog my throat. But for once, the words came clear. I set the pump wrong. I turned 7 into 70. I nearly killed him in that moment. She caught it. She fixed it. Without her, he would have died faster. The fault is mine. Silence. Heavy. Relentless. You admitted nothing of this in your initial reports, the lawyer said. I lied, I said. The word felt corrosive and clean at the same time. I lied to protect myself. I lied to protect the hospital. And in doing so, I dishonored both. The room erupted, voices colliding, papers shuffling, Claire standing in the back with her perfect mask finally cracking. Voss tried to speak again, but his words drowned under the noise. Samira stared at me, her expression unreadable. Anger, relief, betrayal, maybe all at once. The CMO slammed a hand on the table. Enough. This will proceed to full disciplinary and legal review. His voice trembled, not with outrage but with fear. He knew the fire had already leapt the walls. That night, I wasn't escorted home. I was escorted out. Security walked me to the parking lot, badge disabled, coat still inside. The cold air hit like punishment. I sat in my car until the windows fogged, replaying every second of that meeting. For the first time since Daniel Harris died, I felt something shift inside me. Not absolution, never that. But a fracture in the wall of silence I had built. Confession had begun. Exile is not silence. When a system wants you gone, it doesn't simply erase you, it rewrites you. The next morning, headlines appeared. Doctor suspended amid safety scandal. My name, my face, cropped from a hospital newsletter, plastered across local sites. The hospital's statement was sanitized venom. We are conducting a thorough investigation into Dr. Michael Ward's conduct. Patient safety remains our top priority. They had thrown me to the wolves. But the wolves were hungry for more. Reporters reached out, digging for details. Emails, calls, Notes slipped under my apartment door. And for the first time, I didn't delete them. I answered one. Her name was Jenna, the same reporter Samira had first approached. We met in a diner, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tastes like it's been punishing itself for years. She set her recorder on the table between us. "Why now?" she asked. Because the silence was heavier than any consequence. Because Daniel's ghost refused to leave my bed. Because Lily's eyes had cut deeper than the board's judgment. Because the truth doesn't need permission to exist, I said. I told her everything. The decimal error. The cover-up. The trial deaths. The blackmail. Claire. Atwood. Voss. Names that had been protected by walls now set loose into the air. Jenna's eyes widened, her hand tightening around her pen even though the recorder was already catching every syllable. When I finished, I expected to feel empty. Instead, I felt lighter, as though the truth had been clawing from the inside and finally found a crack to escape. "Do you understand what this means?" Jenna asked softly. "Yes," I said. "It means they'll destroy me completely. But maybe someone else will be spared." The story broke 2 days later. Bigger this time. National. Whistleblower doctor exposes corruption in clinical trial. My name was there, but so were theirs. Atwood, the foundation, the CMO, even Voss. The article quoted me directly. "Sometimes, our greatest danger is not outside the hospital walls, but in the compromises we allow inside them." The backlash was immediate. The hospital called me a liar, disgraced, mentally unstable. But investigations began. Regulators appeared. Subpoenas followed. Samira found me outside the hospital one evening, as cameras swarmed the lobby. She looked tired, but her eyes burned with the fire I had nearly extinguished in her. "You did it," she said. "I burned it down," I said. "Sometimes that's the only way to rebuild." She hesitated, then added, "They'll come for me too." "They already have," I said. "But you'll survive. You're the only one who still remembers why we began." She shook her head. "No, you remembered. In the end, you remembered." Voss didn't survive as neatly. The drive he'd waved like a trophy became evidence in an official inquiry. His ambition turned against him, painting him as a manipulator. His name slid into headlines not as successor, but as accomplice. Claire vanished. People like her don't fall, they relocate. One day she was a shadow in my office, the next she was gone. Her cards no longer dialing to any number. Atwood denied everything, of course. Donors rarely drown, they float on the wreckage they create. But the trial was halted. Funding frozen. Families began to sue. And me? I lost my license. The board ruled unanimously. Words like gross negligence and ethical breach became my epitaph as a physician. I packed my office into 2 boxes, plaque still crooked, never straightened. Lily came to see me once more. She didn't forgive me. I didn't ask her to. She handed me the watch. Her father's. "You told the truth," she said. "Too late. But you told it." "I'm sorry," I whispered. She nodded. "So am I." Then she left, and I knew that was the closest thing to grace I would ever receive. Now I sit in a small apartment with peeling paint and silence that echoes. No pager, no rounds, no white coat. Just me and the words I should have spoken years ago. I write them down now. For Lily. For Daniel. For every patient whose trust I bartered. Confession will not bring them back. It will not give me back the title I lost. It will not clean the blood from my hands. But confession is all I have left. And maybe, just maybe, it will mean that someone who hears it will choose differently when the decimal point blinks, when the donor calls, when the trial tempts, when the silence beckons. I am a doctor. I was a doctor. I will never stop being the man who crossed the line. But I will not die carrying it alone.